Hi, I'm Shay Oliver. Welcome to the Priority Paradigm. I'm sharing stories of amazing people who've made radical changes in their lives for something more important. Today, I'm joined by Sarah Elkins, and she has a couple of wonderful stories to share with us. So without further ado, Sarah, tell us your story.
Shay. Thank you, Shay.
You're welcome.
I love telling this story because it always brings back very fond and scary memories at the same time. I can actually feel my heart rate going up as I just think about sharing this story.
Cool.
So I had decided back when I was about 15 that I would never get married and never have kids. That was the way that I saw my future. I just could not imagine keeping interest in anything longer than 15 minutes. So I knew better than to make any kind of a commitment at that point.
Sure.
And it wasn't until I was in my mid-20s that I met my husband. And he's a dozen years older than I am. And when we met, I had decided, I'd sworn off men over 35 and I was 25. And he had sworn off women under 30 and I was 25. And I'm not sure how it all worked out, but it all worked out. And 8 months after starting to date him, I asked him to marry me.
Nice.
Yeah. So we lived in Washington, D.C. at the time. And we had pretty much been living in his apartment on Capitol Hill at 6th and Constitution.
Ooh.
And he had told me he wanted children, but I had told him I didn't. And he was okay with that. And he said, well, I want you more than I want children. So we agreed that we wouldn't have children. And about 6 months after we got married, we were down at his father's place with his niece and nephews. And they were, I think, 6. The niece and nephew twins were 6, and the older nephew was 8 or 9. And we had so much fun together. We were down at his dad's place on a river and fishing. And I was watching my husband teach his niece how to put a worm or bait on a hook.
Yeah.
Cast. And she looked up at him with this awe, and he was so tender with her. And I remember watching this and feeling my ovaries start to ache because I was pushing 30 at this point, right? and I realized that it would be such a waste if he didn't have kids.
Oh.
And it was a few months later, I said, okay, let's do this. And I'm impulsive. So I said, let's do this right now. And he said, oh no, let's give it a little time, since up until now you didn't want children. But we ended up having a baby. And throughout my pregnancy, I was all about planning for going back to work. So I was a high-level consultant implementing PeopleSoft products at federal agencies in the DC area. And it was a big job. I loved what I was doing. I was making a lot of money for somebody with not much experience. And so I loved my career. I was traveling. It felt very novel to me. And all through my pregnancy, I'm making these plans. Like, I have a nanny all picked out. I know how I'm going to start back to work, when I'm going to start back to work. I have a laptop so I can work from home a few hours. I have it all. I have it all together as far as my brain is concerned. And when the baby was born, I went right back to work. Mm-hmm. And I found nursing to be really important to me. And so I would get to work. I'd have to pump because I didn't want the baby to have too much formula because I was producing enough. So I'd pump twice, and then I'd go home and he'd latch on. And for 3 days, while I was working 3 days a week on site, mm-hmm. and driving an hour each way to work, and I'd get home and I would be just exhausted. And I'd take the baby out of the nanny's arms and he would latch on and not let go till the next morning. And it was, oh my gosh, I just remember being so exhausted. And a year before that, my husband had been offered a job in Montana to be the manager of information systems for a nonprofit that he had been on the board of. And he said, what do you think? And I said, no way. We're not moving to Montana. And I don't know if I'm allowed to curse on this, but
oh, absolutely.
At the time I called it Mon-fucking-tana. We're not moving there. It's the middle of nowhere. We're not going there. And I had this great career. And after 6 weeks of going back to work and coming back, I realized that I wasn't seeing my baby enough.
Mm.
And the way I realized it was I walked up our 3 flights of stairs up in this old brownstone building in DC, had parked 3 blocks away because there's no parking nearby.
Oh,
I'm lugging my pump and my heavy laptop, and because this was back when laptops were really heavy, up the stairs. And I get in, and the nanny pushes the baby into my arms. And I look down at him, and he smelled like her. So she had been snuggling him all day. And I had this surge of bittersweet feelings of, thank goodness I found a nanny who loves him and snuggles him all day, but he should smell like me.
Mm.
And that evening I told my husband, I said, okay, I'm ready. We need to live somewhere where one of us can stay home more with the baby. And it was literally a week later, he was re-offered the job from a year before.
Oh, no way.
1 week. And they said, look, the guy that we hired, he didn't work out. Are you sure you don't want to come to Montana? And I said, take it, let's go. My mom was shocked when I told her we were moving to Mon-fucking-Tana. Although I might have left that middle part out when speaking to my mother.
But yeah,
maybe. Yeah. So 4 weeks later, we were in a 24-foot Ryder truck with a 20-foot car trailer. The dog and cat camped out in the Honda on the car trailer.
Oh,
and the 3 of us in the cab of this giant Ryder truck. And it took us a week to move from Washington, D.C. to Montana.
Oh, geez.
It took us a week. And it was full of adventure, getting over here. And what's interesting is this was such a huge decision, such a huge priority change, because I thought my career was my top priority.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to really rethink that. When we moved here, I thought, well, I'll stay home for a little while, then I'll go back to work.
Right.
And we moved in April. And by August, I had started my own business. I had started going to people's homes and offices and training them on their computers. And then by late August, I was teaching at the local community college. I was teaching computer classes because I felt weird about not having any income, and I really needed to do something other than be home with the baby.
Sure.
And I really underestimated what moving here would do to my career. There was an assumption that because I had this great degree in business from Colorado State, all this experience implementing a new software product, I didn't think it would be that hard to find another job and get into it again. And Montana is really hard. And it took me literally 15 years to get my income back.
Mm-hmm.
And people ask me, they say, oh, and you moved to Montana and you never looked back. And I can't say that. That is definitely not the case.
Sure.
However, I know I'm where I'm supposed to be. And making those changes, changing those priorities, doing something as eccentric as moving from Washington, D.C. to Montana, as hard as it was the right thing to do at the time.
Mm-hmm. No doubt. No doubt. So did you have any more kids?
Yes. We moved into a duplex home when we first got here. And a year later, we bought a house because I had to sell employee stock ownership from my previous company that I worked for in DC. And in order to avoid getting hit with major taxes, we bought this house. And it's built in 1890. It's
Wow.
Victorian. Cool. And it's a beautiful, charming old house. And people walk into it and they feel like they're at home. It just feels good. And so we bought the house a year after moving here. And a year after that, we had another baby who is officially a Montana native. And he's very proud of that fact. And then a year after that, we got another dog. And so it's been kind of a snowball effect, working on the house and making investments in our community. And just, I guess finding our way in a place that's so different from how we both grew up.
Hmm. So did you both grow up on the East Coast?
Mostly. Well, I was born in DC. When I was 5, we moved to Denver for a couple of years.
Hmm.
And then we moved to LA, and I was in LA for a few years. Then we moved back to Colorado Springs, where I went to high school, and then
Hmm.
went to college in Fort Collins. Then finally moved back to Washington, D.C. as an adult because I had an internship after college. But
Sure.
my husband was a Navy brat. So he was all over the world. He never lived in a place for more than 8 years.
Oh, so he's had a bit of a ride here too.
He absolutely has. It's been, and he's good with this kind of settling in. I have a hard time with it. I have
Hmm.
to travel because it's a small town here. And sometimes it feels bigger because we have good culture. We have a few decent restaurants. We have a world-class ceramic art foundation just down the road. Um, yeah, so there's a lot here, but it's a small town and there's no anonymity.
Right. It's
So
very different.
I need
Very,
to
very
travel.
different.
Oh, so different. And the diversity, there's a dearth of diversity here.
Yeah, there's a lot of places that are like that, and they're kind of a shock if you're not used to if you're used to having a wider variety of peoples and foods and languages and all the things that surround you. There's definitely a change. Now, if I remember right when you were talking, you had one other story you wanted to share too. So why don't we do that, and then I'm going to ask you some questions.
Okay. Um, when I was in high school and college, I sang a lot. I was in choirs all the time.
Cool.
And in my late 30s, my husband and I met another couple that were also musicians, and none of us had really ever been in a band before, but we all had some kind of training, classical training, or I think my friend's husband kind of taught himself how to play guitar, and super talented musicians. And so the four of us started getting together regularly and doing music together. And Twyla and I sing these really tight and complex harmonies together, the kind that just make all the hairs on the back of your neck come up, and really something very, very special. And after a few months of every week being at our house or being at their house, we'd have dinner, then we'd do music, then we'd meet at their house and then have dinner, then do music. And we did it every week for months. And suddenly we all kind of looked at each other and went, we have a full set. We should think of a band name, and and I was almost 40 at this point. So we started with our first band, and it was jazz. We had some classics, we had some spirituals, it was very eclectic collection of music. We did a Patty Griffin song. But everything was really tight, complex harmonies, and really highly musical,
Hmm.
and very vocal centric. And when just about my 40th birthday, my best friend Twyla and her husband moved away from Helena. So our band had to break up. We couldn't keep going with them 2 hours away because we couldn't practice.
Right.
And my husband said, I want to start a surf band. I've always wanted to play in a surf band.
Cool.
And I was a little puzzled by this. I mean, I knew he loved the Ventures. I knew he loved Dick Dale and Link Ray, but it never occurred to me that he'd want to play that music. So I said, that's great. I think you should do that.
That's
And
all.
I had no impression or no intention of being part of it. And the first night, he got some guys together and they started playing Miserlou, which is one of the key songs by the Ventures. I love that one. It
Hmm.
sounds very Middle Eastern, belly dancer-ish. And they sounded pretty good the first time they did it. And then they started doing a song where a guy was singing. And I came out from my kitchen and said, can I do a harmony on that?
Ah,
If you want a harmony, I would love to do some harmony on that. And he's like, yeah, of course. So I did harmony on that song, but I wasn't part of the band. I had decided I wasn't going to be part of the band. And my husband said, oh, that's okay, because we're going to need go-go dancers.
okay.
And here I am, right around my 40th birthday. I started laughing. I said, honey, I'm not going to be your go-go dancer. He goes,
And sleeping
oh,
on the
but
couch tonight.
yeah. Well, no, I mean, I knew where it was coming from. He's pretty funny. I mean, he has a great sense of
Oh, cool.
humor. and very, very creative. And so I just started laughing, and he said, but we need somebody in some go-go boots to do go-go dancing. And I was like, no, that's really not my thing. So he's like, okay. So I'm starting to look for friends who are dancers, who generally are dancers, and see if I can get some friends to be go-go dancers, and never imagining myself doing that. And for their first gig, it was up at a ski hill near us. And I went up with them because I was going to sing harmonies on a couple of their songs. And I was just wearing regular black boots because it's a ski hill and it was cold.
Uh-huh.
And I went up there and I sang with them a little bit. We had a great time, but I still wasn't part of the band.
Right.
And it was a couple weeks later, the singer sent a link to the song "These Boots Are Made for Walking." Nancy Sinatra. And he said, I think Sarah should sing this song. I think we could really do this. It could be really fun. And my husband said, well, we could give it a try if Sarah's interested. And I said, I'll try it. I mean, I'll try anything once, right? So during that practice, I sang "These Boots Are Made for Walking," and it was a blast. Oh my gosh. It sounded good the first time we did it. And that's pretty rare.
Mm-hmm.
And so we did it again the next week when we were practicing. And then they started sending me more songs. They're like, what if you want to, do you want to sing this one too? And suddenly I was part of the band.
Cool.
And we're getting ready for our first gig. It's like 3 weeks away. And I'm trying to figure out, what am I going to wear that's 60s? And that's when I ordered my first pair of go-go boots.
Cool.
So here I was, 40 years old, singing with the rock band for the first time in my life, just because the opportunity presented itself and I couldn't imagine saying no. And the question I asked myself, which is where I go now, every time I think about doing something that pops into my vision like that, every time I think, will I regret not doing it later on?
Very, very cool. Well, very cool. So are you guys still together as a band?
Yes, the band name, you're going to love this. It's an old Mitch Miller album, Rocket to Uranus.
Awesome. That is a beautiful name. Absolutely beautiful.
It's hilarious. And we have a great time. We've been playing together now for 8 years.
Very cool.
We are breaking in a new bass player and keyboardist right now because
cool.
Our bass player moved away. But we play regularly. We've done actually some pretty big gigs. We got to play at the Evil Knievel Days in Butte, Montana a few years ago.
Cool.
And we've played at Alive at 5, which is the big summer event every week here in Helena, Montana. And there are some big name bands that come. Jimmy Thackeray came through here once with the Nighthawks. Well, he used to be with the Nighthawks. And we've had some pretty big names come through here. The Young Dubliners played here. So for us to share the stage with those guys was kind of a big deal.
That's awesome. That's very, very cool. Well, let me take you back a little bit. I want to go back to Washington, D.C. And the young lady who is career focused and is building up, you're building your resume. You're actually getting out. You're meeting people. What drove from 15 through those years the no kids decision?
Well, there were a few things that happened in those years. My younger sister is 5 years younger than I am. And I kind of raised her. I understood her in a way that my mom just didn't get. Mm-hmm. And so when my mom would try to get into a conversation with her, she didn't really speak her language. So I was a translator.
Sure.
And at some point, I think it was about 12 or 13, I decided I really liked being a big sister, but I wasn't interested in having kids of my own. Mm. And then I babysat a lot. And that was great birth control. Babysitting for kids that were not well behaved, kids that didn't understand boundaries. My sister understood boundaries. My parents were, really good about setting boundaries and were pretty strict about certain things. And most of the kids that I was babysitting were entitled and spoiled. And I just thought, no way. So that was a big part of it. But the other thing was that I am afraid of commitment. And I realized pretty early on that I didn't like to commit to anything that was going to be long-term.
Mm.
If you said on Saturday, I need you to come do this, I would do it. I'm the first to show up. I show up. But as far as like a long-term commitment, being part of an organization, like a nonprofit or professional association, being on a board, none of that appealed to me.
Hmm.
And when I started to realize that, I applied that to my personal life as well. And I realized I don't date men for longer than 3 dates. That was kind of my kiss of death, was the third date. I would be really interested and then really not interested overnight. And I realized that I didn't keep interest in things or people. And I just, other than my friends, of course, I have long term friends, but I was afraid of commitment. I decided that I didn't want to start something that I couldn't commit to.
Sure.
And kids are huge. That
The
is the
biggest,
biggest commitment of your life, is
right.
choosing to have a child. So
That's interesting that, commitment is something that you struggle with. The way you shared your story, part of it, there was definitely a change inside of you when you saw your husband with his niece.
mhm.
But the change had to happen inside of you. He was obviously at a point where he was going to be fine with or without kids. He was going to, it sounds like he would be okay if you had said, this is who I am and we're not having kids. But something had to change inside of you to make the decision to commit and, go through everything that it takes to have a child. What was the biggest changes in you during that period of time after you watched him before you said, let's have kids? What was going through your head? What was going through your emotions?
Shay, I would love to tell you that I think things through. I would love to tell you it was a change in me that took time. I can't I can't even imagine anything had changed in me
Hmm.
other than a split second impulsive. I mean, so the reason I asked Bob to marry me was there was a huge snowstorm in Washington D.C. and we
Mm-hmm.
were stuck in his apartment for a week
Mm.
with his 80-pound lab, my 15-pound cat in a one-bedroom apartment in the district. And we were almost out of food. I mean, it was a long week. And at the end of the week, my sister called me and we were talking. She said, "Where are you?" I said, "I'm at Bob's." She said, "Still? How long has it been? A week?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "And you still like him?" I said, "Yes." She said, "You and I have trouble with that. And we're best friends. I can't even imagine what's going through your head." And I said, "I don't know. Everything's fine. I still like him." She said, "Oh, wow. Okay." And I got off the phone with her and walked over to Bob, who was sitting on the couch watching TV. I grabbed the remote, turned off the TV, and sat on his lap and asked him to marry me. And he said, "What?" I said, "Will you marry me?" And he said, "Are you serious?" And now I'm panicking because I realize this might have been a mistake. And I might have just ruined whatever it was that we had by
Mhm.
jumping in so fast. And he must have seen that fear fill my face because he stopped himself and he said, "Yes, yes, of course, yes."
Very
And
cool.
I was like, whew.
So
So
tell,
I don't know if it wasn't a change to commitment. It was a spontaneous, I really like this guy and he treats me really well and he's respectful and he's encouraging and he thinks that I can do anything I set my mind on. This is a keeper.
so what was the experience like to decide to have children?
Well, it was
Was
kind
that
of
as
similar in that I was sitting watching him on the dock and I felt that change and it felt pretty sudden to me. And so that would have been in July. And in August, I was getting ready to go from Washington, D.C. to Pleasanton, California to do PeopleSoft testing on site at their location in Pleasanton. So we had been married about 3 months and I was moving away for 3 months. And While Bob was driving me to the airport, I said, just something to think about. Um, I changed my pill for prenatal vitamins, thinking that maybe we should have a baby. And since we're going to be apart for 3 months, I thought it made sense for me to do it now. Because really, they say that you should really be off the pill and on prenatals for at least 3 months before you get pregnant. And he's driving me to the airport. This is the first he's heard. I'm telling you, impulsive, Shay. And he looked at me and he had to put his eyes back on the road. He looked at me again, eyes back on the road. And he said, "Are you serious?" And I said, "Do you have to ask me that question?"
Yeah.
And he said, "Well, we have some time to think about it." I said, "Yeah, we do. I can go back on the pill if you decide you don't want to do this." But I thought, this will give us some time to think about it. And we were pregnant in February.
So when you made that decision, you changed the medicines you were on.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, you went from the pill to vitamins. Was that a decision made in the pharmacy?
No, I don't even remember.
No.
I don't even remember. I just remember seeing him with our niece, and realizing something was going to be wasted. And it might have been within a couple of weeks that I happened to be at Osco Drug or CVS or whatever it was. And I happened to be in there and saw prenatal vitamins. That's, if I were to go back those 21 years, I would say that's probably how I made that decision was, prenatal vitamins.
So the move to Montana,
Mm-hmm.
That took nothing more than the offer of the job again. But you were thinking not staying in Washington at that time because of the kids coming?
Because of the baby. Yeah. Well, and I should back up a little bit. I trust my instincts. I am a very intuitive person. I observe a lot of things that are going on around me. So as much as it seems spontaneous or impulsive when I make a decision, there's no way it's totally impulsive based on how my brain works.
Mm-hmm.
I've picked up subtle cues that I've put together in a dot to dot and figured out how to trust myself.
Sure.
So that said, moving to Montana and having Bob get offered this job, I had already come home that night and realized that we needed to be somewhere where I could spend more time with the baby, or Bob could.
Right.
Because where we were, my salary was paying the nanny and my student loans. And that was about it. And it's not that I wanted to move to Montana specifically,
right.
Clearly. I love it here. I badmouth it sometimes because it's hard. It's really hard. You can't be here and not be committed to being here.
Yeah.
You just can't. And the beauty of it is that Montana is so full of self-discovery opportunities if you let it.
Say more about that.
I just had a keynote opportunity last week, and it was up in Whitefish, Montana, which is right at the edge of Glacier National Park on the west side. Spectacular. One of the most beautiful places I've ever been in the world. And the story I told was about how Montana revealed a strength in me, an endurance in me, a clarity of thought that I'm not sure would have been revealed in the same way anywhere else. And the story was when my husband broke his leg 2 miles from the trailhead when we had been camping. And we had the two boys who were 4 and 6 and a puppy and an old dog all with us. And he was 2 miles from the trailhead on a pretty rigorous hike across half-hewn log bridges over creeks. So this is not a walk in the park. This is, you have to get your family off the side of a mountain in bear country in early July. And I did. I found people that I enlisted their help. I figured out how to do what I needed to do, and I got my family off a mountain. And when I got back, the next day, my husband is, on the couch with his foot up and a cast on his leg. And I went back out to the truck to clear all the camping gear out, clean it, hang it up to dry, set it up to dry. And I called my sister, and I hadn't told anybody what had happened because I didn't want to upset anyone. So I called my sister to tell her what had happened. She was living in the Bay Area at the time. And I called her and I told her the whole story, and she just burst into tears. And I said, what's wrong? And she said, you could have died out there. Your whole family, it could have been so much worse. Mm-hmm. And she said, I knew you had it in you, but this just demonstrates that you are officially a Montana family.
No doubt.
So that's what I mean by all kinds of opportunities for self-discovery. I mean, I took up ceramic arts. I had a studio for a while where I was throwing pots, functional work on the wheel.
Cool.
Because the opportunity was there. I sing in 2 bands because the opportunities were there. And these are all things that would have been a lot harder to get into in a bigger city where there's a lot more competition and less time for those opportunities to discover those skills and loves and passions.
Sure. So it's interesting as I listen to you, I really hear, you say you're impulsive, but then you kind of pull back a little and say that, there's an instinct in you that you're actually subconsciously maybe, or something processing in the background that leads you to do something that the rest of us would look at potentially and say impulsive. You might call impulsive, but maybe it's really not. How did you get to the point where you were in tune? Was that just your whole life you've been that way? Or were there things in your life that kind of brought you to the point where you became more self-aware of what was going on and more self-aware of being intuitive?
It was my 30s. It was definitely my mid 30s. Because up until that point, I always thought I was impulsive. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until I actually wrote a blog post about this a while back, about that realization that I just trusted my instincts, where most people, they may have these same instincts, but they just don't trust them, or worse, they're fearful to act on them. Mm-hmm. And I've never been afraid to try something. And part of that is I hit a point in my teen years where I was at the ocean and my brother wanted me to jump into the water and I was scared. And I asked myself these 2 questions even then, and this is something I continue to do. The first one was, am I afraid because I am fearful of being in that water? Or am I afraid because I just don't want to do it? And if I just didn't want to do it, it was much easier for me to say, no, peer pressure isn't going to help. I'm done. I don't have any interest in doing that. But if the thing was that I was just afraid, I would face it and I'd jump in.
And how do you that quote, face your fears? What does that mean on the inside? What does that mean to you? How do you go about taking action emotionally first and then actually with the body?
That's a good question. My first thing is that question, am I afraid because I'm afraid, or am I afraid because I don't want to do it? Or then the next question is, if I don't do this, will I regret not doing it later? Mm-hmm. And as soon as I decide I will regret not doing this later, I jump in. Mm-hmm. I just go. And one of the things I realized a few years ago is that I actually have theme songs that pop into my head.
Okay, we got to know which theme songs. Which theme songs are they?
It depends on the situation. But like I'll do Feeling Good. Etta James' Feeling Good will pop into my head. Birds flying high, you know how I feel. And that will get me going, like if I'm about to step in front of an audience to speak. Mm-hmm. Because I just need to feel good. I need to feel strong. And that's kind of one of the most strong anthems that can pop into my head. And then sometimes it's Chuck Berry. Hey. I feel good. Da-na-na-na-na-na. I knew that I would. Yeah. So And I work with my coaching clients. I'm a communications coach, and I work with my clients about that. When we talk about stepping out of your comfort zone and taking risks, I always encourage them to really look deeply into theme songs.
That's an interesting tactic. I like that.
It works for me.
I'm sitting here thinking if I've done similar things, but I don't know if I have or not, but I have. I think I have some. Yeah, that's very cool. So, as you went through your 30s and you realized some of this, and you started actually practicing more and more and really getting more into it, did you find a difference between? How to ask this? Did you find a difference between those times in Washington and as you've gotten older and jumped in and living at Montana? Your experience of the present moment, has that changed?
Gosh, I hope not. I'm a big person. I'm a big believer in living in the present moment.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it causes me trouble. I just talked to my sister about this, that when people ask how we're different, because my sister and I are a lot alike, and we look a lot alike. We look like twins.
Mm-hmm.
And people ask what the difference is. And I say, well, she's the 5-year plan girl, and I'm the 5-minute plan girl. And that's really how I live my life, even though I do have a sense of responsibility when it comes to financial sense and being there for our children into the future. You know, my health is really important to me.
Mm-hmm.
So as much as it's a present tense thing, like I'm going to go for my walk today, it's also thinking I want to be able to be around when my children are older. So I do think about the future, but really even, I think it's even more so in Montana, because I walk out my door and I'm on a mountain in 5 minutes, and the views are spectacular. And never for a moment do I take it for granted. As soon as I walk out that door, I think, wow, that's pretty.
Yeah, no, I totally relate to that. I grew up in Kansas, and the dirt's not supposed to do that. I get that feeling every time I look west here in Colorado.
Right, I bet.
Yeah, it still blows me away being in the mountains. I'm a mountain fanatic. So I hear the theme songs in the head playing, getting you pumped up and going. Do you have other things that go through your head? Other people that are telling you do or don't do things? The classic internal dialogue.
I do. I definitely have a very active internal dialogue. I call it my monkey brain. It's kind of nonstop. I wake up with it. I go to bed with it.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes if I write down a to-do list, it'll ease up a little bit. But a while back, one of my good friends, Susan Rooks, she's the grammar goddess on LinkedIn. She wrote a post about, I think the title was "Stop Shoulding All Over Me."
Nice.
And it was about, she had gone to the mechanic to get her oil changed. And he kept saying things like, you should have come in 1,000 miles ago, and you should keep an eye on this, and you should make sure you're getting your tires checked, and you should. And by the time she left, she was angry. She was very put upon. And she felt like he was kind of being condescending.
Mm-hmm.
And so she wrote this whole blog post saying, stop shooting on people.
Mm-hmm.
It's not effective. And if anything, it makes them want to do the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
Or leave. Go talk to somebody who's not going to be talking down or condescending to them. And that triggered a whole internal dialogue for me in relation to when we should on ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote this whole blog post about how I handle those shoulds. And it's pretty straightforward. When I hear the word should in my head, and this is something I battle every day. This isn't something that just, it's learned and it's done. When I think I should go to the gym, I ask myself 2 questions. You could see a pattern here, right?
Yeah, I've definitely seen a pattern.
Yeah, every time I have some weird response to something, I have to ask myself questions to get down to why I'm doing what I'm doing or why I'm not doing what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
So the questions come down to, is this should mine or is it somebody else's?
Mm-hmm.
And many times it's my mother's voice or some other person's voice in my life. Sometimes it's my older brother. Sometimes it's my dad who's been gone for 4 years, but I'll still hear his voice in my head. And um, it'll be that moment that I'll decide if it's one of theirs, if it's somebody else's and it doesn't belong to me, I just set it aside and let it go. In the case of the gym, it's mine. It's all mine.
Mm-hmm.
I should go to the gym. And it's that moment that I decide again, I'm going to go right now, or nope, I don't feel like it. I'm not going. And then there's no guilt involved.
Nice. Nice.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that does. And somehow I'm sitting here when the answer is yes, I hear Eye of the Tiger as she heads out the door on her way. Or some other, great workout song.
Yeah, a little Rocky song, right?
Yeah, you got to have a little of that on the way to the gym.
Well, I find that salsa music when I'm working out helps me get a little more limber.
Nice. That's good music.
I love that.
Cool. Well, this has been very interesting conversation. Let me, on a personal note, your children are now how old?
My oldest will be 20 on Saturday, and my baby is 17 and a half.
Very cool. And what are they up to in life?
That's a good question. My older son is taking a gap year. Mm-hmm. He is working at an outdoor sports store, shockingly enough, and loves it.
He's in the right place to do that.
He is in the right place. It's a good job for him. And the owner loves him and treats him really well.
Cool.
And he plans to go for an associate's degree or a certification in aeronautics mechanics starting in the fall next year. Because he's definitely a mechanical guy, really into machining and aeronautics. He knows all the planes. He's one of those guys. And my younger son, he'll graduate from high school on June 1st.
Woo!
And he is likely to go to Montana State University in Bozeman. He loves Montana, but he wants to do study abroad. He wants to explore the world. And thank goodness he has that desire, because we have friends and family all over the world that he can visit. And
that's awesome.
So he's doing his own thing as well. He's like I said, he's our Montana native. And the thing that I love about Max and his interest is that he is very insightful and self-reflective.
Cool.
So, and they're both just kind, really interesting people.
That is fantastic. I'm not surprised by that after listening to you talk and tell your stories. That's how they turned out. So if somebody were to want to know more about you or get in contact with you, what are the best means or methods to do that?
Well, I'd love for people to visit my website, elkinsconsulting.com, because I have some examples of what I do as a communication coach. And I love using storytelling as the foundation of my work, because I believe that our relationships are really dependent on good communication. And when we can share good stories and open up just that level of vulnerability, we draw out the stories of other people. Mm-hmm. And that's what I love to do with sales teams, leadership teams, and individuals. And that's on my website. And you can also see one of my performances, one of my storytelling performances.
Oh, cool.
The link is on my website. And you can hear another one that was on a podcast called Tell Us Something, which is a Montana company based out of Missoula. It's a nonprofit. And so you can hear my first story done on the stage through the Tell Us Something organization. There's a link to that. And there are links to my podcasts. Your stories don't define you. How you tell them will.
Oh, very insightful. I like that.
Yeah. And of course, on LinkedIn, my nickname is The Smile is Free.
The Smile is Free. Very, very cool. We'll make sure to get those on the webpage when we put this video up.
Thank you.
So this project is about making radical changes in life. And your approach has definitely been one of very internally connected, letting your subconscious, letting your intuition, letting the things happen inside of you and following your own gut.
Well, it's also about surrounding myself with people who support that and engage in it with me. I couldn't do it all by myself. I found a partner in my spouse
Yeah, that's
who was patient, but also very encouraging. And my friends, the people that I surround myself with, are the people that say, "You want to do what? That's awesome. How can I help?"
cool. So, given that, what type of advice would you or do you give to people that are at a point where they're trying to make a decision? I go this way, which is the normal path, the expected path, but something inside of me says go this way. What do you tell people like that?
I tell people two things. First, I tell them, if you think you're going to regret not doing this in the future, don't wait. Because I don't want to be having the same conversation with you 1 year, 2 years, 5 years down the line. Is that where we're going to be in 5 years? You're still going to be talking about it?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first piece of advice, is ask yourself that question. Are you going to regret not doing this? And then the next thing is always, are you sure that this is going to fulfill the needs that you have? So one of the things that I struggled with early in my career was choosing jobs that were really not good fits for me. I don't have any regrets because I learned so much from every position. At the same time, if I were to give advice to somebody else, I would say, write down the activities that make your days good, that make your days fulfilled, whether that's writing, coaching, public speaking, coding, accounting, bookkeeping, whatever it is, write down the activities that you would want to fill your day in terms of income producing activities. Write those down and then decide.
Good advice. Very, very good
Thank you.
advice. Well, I always like to wrap up with one question. And that question, I've heard your story. I know a little bit about you, but I don't know everything. So, general rule, I've missed something. So, my last question is, what question should I have asked you?
Gosh.
I can take a win. Believe me, I'm happy with a win. But usually there's something else, either fun or deep or whatever.
How about where my introvert versus extrovert kind of showed up?
Okay.
Where was it in my life that showed up? When did that change? And I would say people are often surprised that I was very shy as a kid.
Huh.
And I was always an extrovert, but I was shy. Mm-hmm. So I loved being around a lot of people, but I had a really hard time speaking up. And in class, I was quiet, but out of class, you couldn't shut me up. So I was very shy up until high school and into my first couple of years of college. And I had this realization that I love public speaking because I love to see an engaged audience. I love to see the light bulb come on. I love hearing people say, "Oh my gosh, this just changed everything in how I'm thinking about X." Mm-hmm. It's just the most magical experience. And in order to be able to do that, I had to get past the shyness. Mm-hmm. So it surprises people often that I tell them I used to be shy.
Yeah, no, I would not have guessed that. I would not have guessed that at all. So, well, cool. Well, thank you. Well, Sarah, thank you so much for your time today. This has been so much fun learning about your story. And I hope that Montana continues to provide you tons of opportunity for self-discovery, and that you continue having great success in everything that you do. So thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you so much for inviting me to join you.
My pleasure.